Archibald Joseph Cronin was born in Dunbartonshire, England in 1896 to a Protestant mother and a Catholic father. Cronin was 7 years old when his father died of tuberculosis. His mother eventually went on to become the first woman public health inspector of Scotland. Cronin received a scholarship to study medicine, which he did at the University of Glasgow, passing out with the highest grades. Later, he travelled out to India. In 1925, he acquired an MD. He worked at various hospitals in England and published scholarly studies on diseases, even as he stored away his experiences as a doctor to eventually produce his famous fiction. He married Agnes Mary Gibson, who was also a doctor. Cronin is best known for The Citadel, The Stars Look Down, and The Keys of the Kingdom. However, what is interesting is that by the time he wrote these works, he had given up the medical profession, devoting his time fully to writing. Cronin worked very hard and very fast, often writing up to 5,000 words a day. His stories appeared in numerous international periodicals and newspapers in Europe as well as in the United States. The Cronins, in fact, eventually spent several years in the USA, mainly because his books were made into hugely successful films. The last 25 years of his life were spent in Europe, especially France and Switzerland. Cronin died in January 1981. What is astounding is he had been diagnosed with duodenal cancer in 1930 and was given 6 months to live. Cronin, as a doctor and a writer, surely appreciated the joke. The best investment I ever made was first published in the popular periodical Reader's Digest in March 1951. Hello, my name is Pramod Nayar of the Department of English, University of Hyderabad. In this session, we will look at the novelist, essayist J Cronin's short autobiographical piece, The Best Investment I Have Ever Made. This autobiographical piece is part of a very large group of writings that Cronin has done. He is known primarily as a novelist. The novels were made into successful films. This is very different from everything else that Cronin ever wrote, and this comes from a very personal encounter that he had as a young practicing doctor in London, and later the recollection of it when he meets the same young man. The autobiographical piece, the essay, has a few key arguments, or we can say these are truths that we can glean from the essay about human nature. The first is that all human beings are prone to temptation. We are vulnerable, we are innocent at certain moments in our life, we might be naive, but we are all prone to temptation. This temptation might sometimes result in errors of judgment, and when we judge somebody else's errors, we cannot judge them only on the basis of the law. That is, we need to understand the contexts in which any individual makes a certain decision, right or wrong. The essay calls upon us to also meditate on how the kindness of strangers can transform people's lives. The essay also suggests to us that we cannot always act out of a calculated utilitarian method of thinking. What do we mean by that? What the essay suggests is our actions cannot be wholly determined by what profits we hope to make from our acts. Sometimes we might have to act without necessarily thinking of what it will get us. That is, we cannot always calculate the profits on our actions. Finally, the autobiographical essay by Cronin also suggests to us that people given a second chance in life might turn out to be doing some wonderful, something different later in their own lives. The essay has two main protagonists, the doctor, which is J Cronin himself, and the boy he helped several years ago when he first started his medical career in London, and who is now a very senior person who runs an agency to help other poor young boys who have been trapped in a life of crime. So there are two stories here. The doctor narrates both of them. One is the boy's story, the other is the doctor's own story. The boy, an orphan, had been looked after by his uncle, who found him an unnecessary extra member of his family. The boy was found a job in London. He moves to London, has no friends, and in the midst of a rather depressing life of his job, of a place that he doesn't quite like, he falls into bad company. As a result of that, he begins to gamble. He starts losing his salary. All this is because he needs to be with some friends, or what he thinks are his friends. This is a boy from the countryside, not quite used to the way London and Londoners live. As he gambles, he keeps losing more money, and one day he is told that there is a surefire bet on a particular horse, but he doesn't have the money to bet on the horse. So he takes a very small amount from his office. He steals £7 and a few shillings to place his bet on what he thinks is a certain winner. As luck would have it, the horse does not win. The boy loses his money. He is not only in debt, he has also committed theft. He expects to be arrested because of the theft and thrown into prison. Depressed, anxious about his future, and with no help, the boy tries to commit suicide. It's this moment at which the doctor enters his life. The doctor is called out in the late hours of the night, but he manages to save the boy's life. The boy's story now proceeds on a slightly different route. The boy who has been rescued in that sense from either death or prison discovers that perfect strangers have helped him. The landlady forgoes her rent, the policeman who found the boy does not arrest him, and the doctor saves him. The next stage here is very important. The three of them decide that they need to help the boy. The doctor lends him £7 and the few shillings that he had stolen to replace the money he had taken from the office safe. The policeman, like I said, decides that he will not file a case of attempted suicide actually. The boy is saved, and many years later decides that he must do something because he has been saved by complete and total strangers. The boy now starts an organization as an older man where he helps younger boys like himself when he had done all those things in his youth. He helps them to get away from a life of crime, to get away from prison and start a new life. The boy's story is very important because it shows the transformation of a rather misguided, rather uncertain youth into a confident but more importantly a caring individual. The boy's story is therefore the result in that sense of somebody who has thought about himself. How did I reach this position? I have reached this position because some strangers helped me. Let's now, at this point, run through the themes in the boy's story. The first and most obvious one is the corruption of youth, that the boy who comes to the city, unable to fend for himself, falls prey to his immediate requirements, company and friendship. The second theme is not actually unique to the story. The second theme is of the corruption of the country bumpkin, as it's called, the person from the village who comes to the city and is corrupted by the city. It's a theme we see in European literature since the 16th century at least. The third theme is the moral dilemma of the child or the young man who, having given in to the temptations of the city, unable to curb his expenses or his desires, gets into trouble. His moral dilemma is to confess to what he has done and go to prison. He has stolen some money from his office and must turn himself in. He must admit it. But the boy does not want to do this. He's afraid of going to prison. This is his moral dilemma of owning up, of taking responsibility for what he has done. The fourth key theme is his transformation from a very strong self-realization. The boy redeems himself because of his self-realization. This process of redemption, as it's called, is based on his discovery that, one, he has been stupid, innocent, vulnerable. His realization that strangers have helped him. His realization that he needn't go to prison or pay the price for his crimes. But the most important realization of all is that he is being given a second chance to live, to do something worthwhile in his life. Years later, this redemption that came out of his self-realization is what transforms the young man. The boy's story is important because it suggests to us, if you want to think of it as a moral, it suggests to us that we need to look at ourselves. The boy years later understands that he has been helped by complete strangers, strangers who had no need to help him, who could have just passed on without looking twice at him. Later, when he is a successful man, he redeems himself again by remembering those incidents and deciding to help strangers himself. The boy's story therefore offers us a moral. If you have learned from your mistakes, then you can help people who are making mistakes. You can help people to prevent them from getting into worse errors of judgment. The boy's story therefore constitutes what we can think of as a story of redemption. A boy who has been saved by strangers, who then ends up saving others. Let's now turn to the doctor's story. Please note, the doctor, when he helps the boy who has tried to kill himself, is a beginner in the medical profession. The interesting thing in the doctor's story is the doctor does not at any point present himself as a very generous, unselfish soul. In fact, he says he was asleep when the knock on the door came and he was called out to help the boy who had tried to kill himself. And he says, in those times of necessity, a knock on the door, even in the middle of the night, was welcome because it meant some money. What's important here is that the doctor does not present himself as a saint. At no point do we get the impression that he calculates his acts of generosity. What's interesting is that he confesses that he went out to help whatever had happened, whoever was ill, because he hoped to make some money out of it, because he was a struggling medical practitioner at the beginning of his career in expensive London. Now, the doctor has gone out to help, manages to save the boy, and offers him a little money to tide over the immediate crisis in his life. Years later, after the boy, who is now a young man, meets him, the doctor realizes that he had done something wonderful, something noble, but had never thought about it. What's interesting here is you can see both his actions as some kind of investment. Please note that's the word in the title. When he first went out to help the boy, he was investing in something. He was hoping to make a profit out of his medical practice. He does not make a profit actually at that point in this particular case, but he goes out with the intention of making a profit on his medical expertise. That is, his medical expertise is an investment out of which he hopes to gain something. The second investment is what he performs unconsciously, offering some help to the boy, financially so that the boy's career is saved and he doesn't have to go to prison. These two are both acts of investment. The first one driven by the need to make something for himself. The second investment is not about himself. So you can think of the doctor's story as having two parts, both dealing with investment. The first, where he hopes to gain something for himself. The second, in which he had no idea what he was hoping to achieve. In fact, from the second one, you can draw a larger moral. And that moral is, sometimes our acts have consequences which we cannot begin to predict, which we cannot ever know. The best investment I have ever made, as he says, is the little help I gave to that young boy. It saved him, and more importantly, it made him a different person. Now, the idea of investment in the doctor's story is very interesting. Investment is a kind of profit that you expect out of something you have put in, out of what you have invested. So you put in some money, you expect to get some more money back. What is the profit he gains? In fact, that's the irony in the title. There is nothing the doctor personally gains from his investment. There's nothing that he benefits from directly. The investment he makes is, as he tells us towards the end of his tale, maybe he has managed to do a good deed which will help him maybe go to heaven. Maybe on the day of judgment it will turn out to be in his favor. There's a slightly more biblical or religious angle towards the conclusion of the story if you pay attention to that. The best investment, therefore, is something you do without thinking of profits. And this is very important if you want to think of a moral from the story, the doctor's story, that is. Let's go back a bit here. In the boy's story, the boy who is helped, that is, the boy's story, the moral is of redemption from self-realization. In the doctor's story, the moral is of help or investment without consciously aiming for a profit. So what does the story actually tell us? What does this autobiographical essay by the Dr. J Cronin tell us? It tells us, like I said, two stories, the boy's story and the doctor's story. But the two stories together constitute a larger tale, a theme about the human condition and what the humans ought to be. Let's take the boy's story first. The boy's story is one of conscious transformation. The boy who grows up to be a man, having been saved by strangers, consciously decides to change himself. The boy's story, therefore, is a story of conscious transformation into a good citizen of the world. The boy did not expect to be helped. The boy expected to go to prison. Complete strangers who ought to have been very harsh on him helped him. Years later, he decides that he must learn from it. Let's recall here the phrase I used, self-redemption through self-realization. He saves himself because he understands what has happened to him. The boy's transformation, therefore, can be thought of as voluntary goodness, where he decides that hereafter I shall be a better person. The boy, now a young man, realizes that goodness is something you can achieve by planning to be good, by working to be good. Let's turn here again now to the doctor. The doctor had no plans to be good. The doctor's plan was to make a little money out of helping a patient. The doctor's aim was to start making a living from his medical expertise. Yet he helps this young man. Please understand that he helps along with two other strangers, all of them equally unknown to the boy and the patient unknown to them. The doctor is therefore somebody who acts and does well without consciously planning to act and do well. This you could think of as involuntary goodness. Let's go back a minute. In the boy's case, I said he is deciding to do good hereafter. He takes a decision that hereafter he will transform himself, which I refer to as voluntary goodness. This is involuntary goodness in the doctor's case because the doctor unassumingly, unwittingly and unconsciously offers help to a perfect stranger. Involuntary goodness suggests here that he is innately, by his own nature, a good human being. He does not need to take decisions and have a moral crisis. The boy, if you recall, and I mentioned this as one of the key themes, the boy has a moral dilemma. When he grows up, he resolves this dilemma by saying, hereafter I shall help those who are less privileged than me. The doctor, however, helps people not because he decides so, but it comes naturally to him. The story therefore offers us two models of human goodness, the involuntary and the voluntary one. But it also offers us something larger, something slightly more than just the story of these two goodnesses. What is this larger theme that we can glean from the story? What is the larger moral? The future of humanity rests upon these individual acts of kindness, whether voluntary or involuntary. If the doctor helped on his own by not thinking about it, the young man begins to help people by thinking consciously about it, by planning to be good. What Cronin's essay suggests is that in these unknowing and knowing acts of consciousness, we contribute to the larger good of humanity itself. The definition of human, or the definition of human goodness, is the ability to respond to the suffering of complete strangers. This is an ethical moment in the story. What is an ethical moment? An ethical moment is the choice we make as to how we will behave, how we will respond to somebody else. The boy who grows up responds by very consciously conditioning his response to suffering, to people less privileged than him. In the case of the doctor, he responds instinctively, but both, please note, respond to suffering. They do not pass suffering strangers and ignore them. The future of humanity lies in our ability to respond in a particular way to the suffering of even complete strangers. What constitutes us as human is the ability to respond and the willingness to respond. Whether you have instinctively responded or whether you have consciously responded at some point becomes irrelevant. What is imperative is that to be human is to be able to respond to a fellow human being.